Machinima, the company that once dominated early YouTube gaming, has become a thing of the past. Today we're going to explain how something that started with a bold idea but quickly became a cautionary tale in the digital world. Now I have a little bit more insight in this space because I've been in this industry for 8 years, working in it at MCN, and I also worked as a head of gaming where I managed all the gaming influencers, so let's jump right into it. So with Machinima, while it initially offered an outlet for creators and paved the way for gaming content on YouTube, its rapid rise is followed by corporate greed, exploitation of its talent, and a complete disregard for the very creators who helped build its empire. Today we're going to be looking at the dark side of Machinima's history, their shady contracts, and their corporate idiocy and greed, and the complete failure of Machinima to adapt to the rapidly changing world of gaming content. Let's get started with the rise and fall of Machinima, and let's see where this pioneer of YouTube gaming culture went wrong and became a corporate disaster. So believe it or not, Machinima actually started in the early 2000s, and it was born out of the idea of a gamer's desire to create stories using video game engines. So the concept of Machinima itself was to make films with video games, which was actually an intriguing idea, and it brought in the potential for a new kind of digital storytelling. However, as much as it started with creators at its core and the idea of content creation, it didn't take long for its intentions to turn to profit strictly. So in 2004, Machinima.com launched as a platform for gamers to upload their films, but even from the beginning there were whispers of a more corporate agenda. While the website did have a small community of creators who experimented with Halo, Quake, The Sims, it became apparent that profitability was always the driving force. Now let me just clarify, this was at a time when creating content wasn't exactly profitable. For example, I remember it was around 2014 to 2016, a CPM, so how much you would basically get paid for 4,000 views on YouTube, was around $3, and that was considered really good. Whereas nowadays, if you have, for example, a finance channel, your CPM could be as high as $22. Just to kind of put that into perspective. So it is odd seeing a website that was founded on the idea of creating content and enjoying that to very quickly transition into how can we make money out of this, and then how can we exploit our creators for our corporate interests. Now with that covering the history of Machinima from the year 2000 to 2004, in 2005 was the birth of the Machinima YouTube channel, and this is where they really went haywire. So from 2005 all the way to 2009, they had a very rapid growth. So for any of you that are old enough to remember, they had YouTube series like Red vs. Blue, which was a Halo 3 series. It was made by Rooster Teeth. So let's get right into the beginning. So by 2006, YouTube had exploded in popularity, and Machinima saw an opportunity here to capitalize. They very quickly started launching their own YouTube channel, and while it did kind of gain early success with viral hits like I mentioned, Red vs. Blue, this success wasn't about creative freedom, it was about corporate control. So while creators were benefiting from the exposure, Machinima made sure to take the lion's share of the revenue. And when I say this, I am not joking. If you go back into YouTube's history, you'll see creators like, the most I think well-documented case of this would be creators like PewDiePie. However, a creator you would find a hilarious video of is Louis Caliber. So Louis Caliber, I believe now has quit YouTube. However, back in the day, he was signed with Machinima, and he had a thing where he quit YouTube for 2 years just to get out of his 3-year Machinima contract. And then when the contract was over, he got back into YouTube and exploded. And Machinima was notorious for doing this. So they weren't just supporting creators, it was about creating an empire built on the backs of their creators. So they began forming partnerships with large game publishers, securing exclusive deals to promote, for example, like new titles that came into the industry in exchange for more control over the content being produced. And this shift specifically marked the beginning of their corporate-backed ideology and greed that pushed Machinima into the trajectory that it later went down. And then by 2009, Machinima had over 4.5 million subscribers and 1 billion views a month. But behind the scenes, the company was making its biggest mistake. They were catering to advertisers at the expense of their creators. And I'll go into a deeper dive on that in just a bit, but that was what spelled the destruction of the whole MCN industry, or the multi-channel network industry. With this, they had to limit creative freedom to ensure that they cover the need for advertiser-friendly content, or what you hear a lot about as family-friendly content. And because of that, they actually shifted away from what made Machinima so popular, like Red vs. Blue and all that other innovative gaming content that initially made them successful. Now we're going to talk about peak Machinima years. Now, it was around this time that I got myself into the industry and started managing managing influencers. So starting off at 2010 to 2014, with Machinima's rise came an influx of creators, and I remember they had some crazy numbers back in these days. So a lot of them were just kind of looking for a chance to get paid, because back in those days you could not get paid by YouTube without having a partnership. It wasn't like now where you would just get 1,000 subscribers, 4,000 watch hours, and you're kind of by default thrown into the creator program. Back then you actually had to apply quite consistently to get into that creator program, and believe me when I say it was treacherous. So what happened with companies like Machinima is they would be able to get this creator, or let's call it corporate partnership with YouTube, and then as a result any creators that would sign under them would be able to get paid by YouTube, whereas creators that did not have an MCN would not get paid. And it was with this newfound exploitation of labor that Machinima was able to grow. So in 2011, Machinima actually secured a $35 million investment from Warner Bros. Just to put that into perspective, that is huge, especially for back in 2011. This isn't even nowadays. They were able to secure so much money from Warner Brothers, solidifying its transformation into a corporate entity. So at this point, you know, it was no longer about creating content, creating good content. It was now instead about just how much money can we make and how much can we exploit these creators. But at this point, it started becoming clear that Machinima just did not care about their creative community anymore. So the contracts they were actually signing with their creators, this was a big chunk of the work I used to do back then, was we would make sure that our contracts were actually very fair. Now, the kind of contracts Machinima had signed were usually these are ad revenue shares, right? So for example, the company gets an X amount, you get an X amount, the company offers services in exchange for that amount, and then that amount is renegotiated every 6 months to a year. Machinima didn't do that. Machinima had the creator getting cuts as low as 10 to 15% of their own revenue. So if you were making, let's say, very simply $1,000 a month, you would keep 100 to 150 of that. And what they did was they would sign what is called an exclusive deal. Now, this is something we didn't do as a company very frequently unless a creator requested this, where we would kind of go into a full management protocol as opposed to just supporting them and getting them deals and things of that sort and providing them with tools and all that jazz. They would sign exclusive deals. That basically meant that if a company wanted to advertise with you, they were not allowed to. They had to go through Machinima, pay Machinima 90% of the cut just to get you to get paid 10%. And if you weren't going to do that, you were going to get sued. So it's not like you could go around this. And with that, they rigged the system. So Machinima's viewership grew. Their creators saw little profits from their content. Starting in 2013, Machinima faced major backlash as creators started to report that they had unfair revenue splits, which is disgusting, by the way, because back when I started working at an MCN, it was interesting to see that the largest cut we would ever take from a creator, and this was if they were an extremely small creator, we're talking under $100 a month, we would take 50%. Whereas we would go as low as 2.5% with creators because we understood our role was support. We weren't there to own the creator, we were there to support the creator to grow, and that's why the company's now grown to quite a substantial size. And with Machinima's reliance on corporate sponsors, they had a complete shift in content. No longer was this a place for creators to make art and to make good content that they enjoyed to make. It became a content factory where creative freedom was basically uncalled for, and the whole goal was to get as many views to generate the most amount of profit. And with that, you started seeing the push of generic, advertiser-friendly or family-friendly content, and very little was left to innovation. Now, you'll see this if you go back to those days of content where creators like PewDiePie, I believe, started to explode around this time because he was just so human. Whereas a lot of the other content just became very, very overly structured, overly corporate, and no longer entertaining to watch. And this is what began the dark side of Machinima's corporate model. They've started betraying their own creators. And this kind of spanned between 2011 to 2016, but let's jump into it. So as Machinima grew, so did the resentment from its creators. Of course, you would resent a company taking 90% of your profits, right? What was once a community-driven platform had become a corporate machine, squeezing creators for profits without giving them the respect they deserve. Machinima had contracts up to 5 years, and I've heard rumors, no proof of this, but I've heard rumors of 10-year contracts. Granted, I guarantee those contracts didn't survive, but it is interesting to see how far they went towards their corporate greed. And a part of their exclusive contracts was also where they would limit the types of platforms you could be on. So at that time, there were a lot of platforms coming out, right? People were innovating in the industry. Machinima would be able to limit your platforms, the networks, or even your ability to create content outside of Machinima's vision. So many creators would report, of course, being trapped when their content was earning millions of views, but they were making only a fraction of what they deserved. deserved. Meanwhile, advertisers were the ones dictating the type of content that should be made, and the pressure to create advertiser-friendly material led to a very quick decline in the quality of content. More safe and mainstream content and less raw creative energy had made Machinima unique. But things only got worse. So in 2013, Machinima demonetized several popular channels without any explanation, and this just goes to show the power that they had, leaving creators scrambling to figure out why their videos have been flagged, and the lack of transparency along with a growing sense of betrayal is what led to a wave of creators abandoning the network. And then it happened in the beginning, it was very gradual, but it started getting sharper. So by 2016, Machinima's viewership had dropped by 25%, which is a very big number considering this was a growing industry. So they were dropping, what, 25% year over year. And as creators moved on to more lucrative and creator-friendly platforms, just like the kind of MCN I worked for, we started seeing a change in Machinima's landscape. Now later on in Machinima's career, and we're talking at this point, I'm going to say 2014 to 2017, Machinima failed to an insane degree to adapt to the changing industry. Starting off, it was a major YouTube algorithm shift in this time that favored long-form content and watch time over shorter, more experimental content, which had initially been Machinima's bread and butter. So a lot of Machinima's older content was more what you could consider nowadays as gag reels, or more quick and funny content where people didn't have a chance to realize what they were watching. It was just kind of like, oh, you saw this, boop, next step. And I remember this part of the industry was very interesting to watch because what creators started doing was kind of what we saw a wave of back in 2021, where creators would start making short clips and just making many of them because each view had its own monetizability, as opposed to now where we have mid-roll ads where now creators are incentivized to make longer content, which is kind of the shift that happened here. It was a little different, but it did end up favoring longer videos. And at this time, we were starting to see the rise of Twitch and YouTube gaming, which gave creators a new home, and where live streaming became more appealing and it started giving the gaming videos more interactivity. But with that, instead of adapting, Machinima wanted to stick to its business model, which was a huge failure. And as a result, the company didn't innovate, and with the corporate content, you could now say, people started to just leave it and go on to new creators. So, and I believe this was around 2015, 2016, where the algorithm push was actually towards engagement. So you would get a lot of creators, if you go back into those older videos, saying, oh, leave a comment, or they would try to do a lot of rage bait because YouTube would push your content if there was more engagement with it. And I remember this because we used to have an audit for creators to ensure that their engagement would go over 2%, because what you see even now, a 2% engagement rate is pretty average. You would want to be around 5% if you're a creator, so that kind of did stick in the YouTube algorithm, where the more engagement, the better the video, but it also eventually became a red flag for YouTube. So if you push engagement too hard in your video, YouTube will actually hold back your content. So this was actually pre-adpocalypse, so a lot of people were still pushing out edgy content. This was prime time for PewDiePie, for example, prime time for the Vanoss crew, prime time for a lot of these big names in gaming, and it was less of this kind of more child-geared gaming content that you're seeing now. So with that, by 2016, Machinima's viewership had dropped significantly and their revenue plummeted. So its inability to evolve to the rapidly changing gaming industry became a major factor in its downfall. We were already speaking of Machinima's downfall back in 2016 because it was very obvious. And beyond that, it was very clear to everyone, including Warner Media, the people that invested $35 million into Machinima, that Machinima was in a very dangerous place. So they did in 2017 try to revive Machinima, but by this point it was too late. Machinima as a platform has lost its core community, and the once innovative brand was now a shadow of its former self. At peak, I believe Machinima had 20,000 creators signed with it, which is a stupidly large number. It is an unfathomable amount of YouTubers or influencers that are signed with this particular network. So they even tried to add an esports division at this point, which failed miserably because people wanted to see Machinima fail at this point. And that takes us to 2019, when Machinima was officially shut down and absorbed by Fullscreen Media, which is an MCN that Warner Media owns. The Machinima YouTube channel, once one of the largest gaming channels, if not the largest gaming channel on the platform, was wiped off the map, the legacy of Machinima now reduced to a forgotten relic, left behind a sour taste for many creators who were exploited and abandoned by the platform they themselves helped build. And with that said, the downfall of Machinima is a cautionary tale for the dangers of corporate greed and the issues that YouTube could face. It is pretty funny to see that YouTube even now is not learning all the lessons it should have from the rise and fall of Machinima, with its shift now to more corporate friendly content. content, which is what we've been seeing more and more of, and the extreme direction towards censorship and ensuring that there's just one ideology online, we are seeing a very strong greed-driven shift on YouTube itself that if YouTube doesn't wake up to, we are actually going to see the platform itself plummet.